By the end of these two episodes, I feel that you'll have a firm grasp on who David is, what he intends to destroy, and also why. To begin talking about episode 4, you have to note that for reasons not fully explained, Javon decides to leave a Kristen from Frank's apartment. Now, in one of the former episodes, I think episode maybe 2 episode 2 I believe, you kind of get hinted that maybe something happened, but when it came to that flashback that we got in episode 2, you almost are led to believe that Javon died and maybe Frank did too because their apartment got attacked. Yet here we are, and it seems like they left Frank's place not because they got attacked, or maybe that Javon and Frank had an issue, or even Kirsten and Frank had an issue. It's just they left for reasons that don't seem substantial enough considering what the protections you have in Frank's place. For with him being high up, it's not likely that if there was any kind of attack that they couldn't possibly, finagle something to see what was coming down the pipeline. But Javon had his reasons, and so him and Kristen left. And they find this cabin that has electricity, and you're just left to question, how did they find this cabin? Was it something maybe that Frank had, like because Frank had money? Could it be something that Sia had tucked away for like summer or winter vacation? Why and how did they get this place? And on top of that, there's also the question of, like another character we'll talk about with episode 5, Kirsten has an obsession with Station 11 and the graphic novel that Miranda made. And you're left to wonder, when Javon decides to go out, why did he take this knowing how much the child likes this story? And also, why did we see it on the ground and it seems that either Javon was kidnapped, killed, or ran off? What happened there? But going from year 1 of Kirsten past day 0 to year 20, you're starting to see that when it comes to Alex, it's not so much that Alex is like a friend or maybe the little sister that she always wanted, but there's kind of like a maternal relationship there. And with that, you can see that with Alex being somewhere around 20 years old, she kind of wants to rebel a little bit. Because, she was raised by the Traveling Symphony, and at this point in her life, she hasn't really gotten to play the lead character because that's what Kirsten has done. And after talking to David, she kind of got mesmerized, if not outright seduced, about the idea of somebody who wants to do things differently. For as much as Alex, Kirsten, and the rest get to travel the wheel, which I can't say how big the wheel is, we just know it has at least 5 or 6, maybe more towns in it. She wants to see beyond that. She wants to explore who she is, and especially when it comes to Kirsten, she wants to be less protected and maybe experience some kind of danger because she's a teenager, and of course she wants to have real experiences that are not either curated for her or else aren't controlled by other people, if that makes sense. So, with Alex mentioning a lot of different parts that are in the Station 11 graphic novel, it makes Kirsten wonder, whether or not Gil might have been attacked or something might happen to him, because Kirsten's under the impression that she has one of the only remaining copies of the Station 11 graphic novel. So, despite Sarah's relationship with Gil, and just for a little background, Gil and Sarah founded the Traveling Symphony, and Gil was the director, and Sarah was the one who did the conducting, and at the time they were also married. However, Gil had an affair, and he got with someone named Katrina, and because of that, he ended up staying at a country club called Pinktree, which is formerly one of the stops that the Traveling Symphony would go on when they would split up for a little bit. But ever since that affair and the fallout, Sarah has it where they don't touch that place at all. So in order to get Sarah to go back there, Kirsten decides to spread a rumor that Katrina died, and with that, Sarah kind of has a bit of hope left because she still has feelings for Gil. It's just, she's hurt. Upon arriving to Pinktree, she finds out that's a lie. And on top of that, we learn that there's a minefield around Pinktree. And previously there wasn't mines, it was just a warning sign, but now they put it back in because David did actually visit Pinktree and also took some of Katrina's grandkids. Because of that, one of the things Gil is hoping to get out of Sarah when it comes to her visit, especially because she brought the acting part of the Traveling Symphony while the musicians went to a different location to be meet up with later, he's hoping that he'll get a performance out of them. The problem with this is when Gil was a director, when it came to the Shakespeare, wanted to do something different, maybe switch things up a little bit, while Sarah was very much a traditionalist. And when it comes to them going back and forth for what to do, and even Katrina chiming in, Sarah decides in order to get the upper hand and show that she can change, because there's still a little bit of animosity because of the affair and everything. She says that Wendy actually wrote a modern version of Hamlet that takes place in Portland, and really to switch it up, instead of Kirsten being the lead in Hamlet as she was in the previous episode, that has gone to Alex. Now, Alex is ecstatic about this because I don't think she's ever gone to play lead, but you can see with Kirsten, between being a Shakespearean trained actor and also not playing lead, despite what she said to Dan in the previous episode, in terms of, making sure you give to the other actor and not make it about you and whatnot, she kind of does. And it takes a bit of the high out of that. It takes a bit of the high that Alex has about being the lead. And especially during the play, you can see that they're definitely having issues and they're having it through the characters. But bad becomes worse because after the play is over, it's not a big celebration like we saw in the last time that Hamlet was done. Instead, Alex and Kirsten kind of butt heads a little bit, especially because Alex is still talking about possibly leaving the Traveling Symphony for David. And the way you could possibly look at it, either Alex is aware of where David is and it's just when they were supposed to meet up, they just... Let me backtrack a little bit. Before Kirsten stabbed David, Alex was already on her way out. In fact, she wanted to meet up with him, but David wasn't there, so she just went back with the Traveling Symphony. So now, after the Hamlet is done in Pinktree, it might be that again she's going to seek out David, and be it timing or maybe some nefarious plan was done. As Alex leaves, some of the children that David originally kidnapped, seduced, and played the Pied Piper against, they come back and they have mines strapped to their chest. With these mines, they kill Gil, and now there's a question of how many other children may get sent. For when it comes to David, he did warn that Kirsten's going to lose Alex and also the Traveling Symphony. Now, in episode 4, it's not clear why he's targeting them specifically, but in episode 5, we do get a strong sense of why Kirsten and the Traveling Symphony have been targeted. With episode 5, the focus is mostly on Clark, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's son with Arthur named Tyler. All three of them are on the same plane on the way to Arthur's funeral, which following that Clark is supposed to take Arthur's body over to Mexico to be properly buried. From the start, it's very clear that Elizabeth and Clark don't necessarily have a relationship, and it's probably because Clark had a falling out with Arthur, it seems, and on top of that, Elizabeth knows Arthur's a womanizer and is pretty sure that Clark knew, so there's a little bit of an issue there as well. As for Tyler, it seems that he doesn't have much, if any, relationship with Clark, so while he wants to tout himself as Uncle Clark, Tyler often looks at him like, "Are you sure?" And then with day 0 hitting, it means everybody's plane gets grounded, and these people who barely talk to each other kind of stuck with each other. But to make matters a little bit worse, alongside their plane being grounded, there's another one, but that plane is secluded because it has the infected on it. So for at least 14 or so days, I want to say, that plane is off to the side. And one of the main things that Clark, Elizabeth, and Tyler are worried about is what are they going to do? Now, multiple things happen during that 14 so day period. The first is a gentleman who pretended to be like a federal agent but actually was just a custodian. He tricks a soccer team full of women, possibly Tyler's nanny, and a few others into joining him and a pilot that was supposed to take Elizabeth over to Chicago because she chartered a jet. Those people go down to the Florida Keys. This causes issues for the people who remain behind, but Clark kind of manipulates the situation so that their mutual hatred of the custodian who left makes it so they can kind of create a group together. And then with this group, the leadership is going to be Clark, who is kind of like the head of state when it comes to talking to people. Elizabeth is put in there mostly because of her popularity that you can see is kind of waning. And then following them is a TSA agent named Miles, who, alongside knowing the airport, he seems to have some type of laboring skills. So when it comes to the solar panels that the airport recently bought but haven't installed yet, he could put that together. Tyler's also put into this, and it seems originally it might have just been but to shadow them. But he also kind of shows that with this huge gaming device he has, he's still able to get an internet connection from a German satellite and can start downloading Wikipedia articles that contain human history. Alongside that, he also seems to have a way with children, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, which, when it comes to Clark, you can see with Clark, one of his main issues when it comes to Arthur, and it kind of came down to Tyler as well, is their charisma and their charm makes it so they don't have to try as hard as he does. And there's a little bit of jealousy in that. Or at least, if you believe Elizabeth, one of the reasons why Clark and Arthur had a fallout was because of this jealousy and insecurity. And even though there are problems, Clark says he still does love Arthur. So you can definitely tell it's a complicated relationship. But as we move past day 14 and move on, there is a moment when Elizabeth tries to really address the fact that Tyler just lost his father, because Clark tries to poke and prod at it, but he's not really getting anywhere. So Elizabeth brings it up, and she tries to soften Arthur's image by making it seem like, yes, Arthur did try, but because he cheated on me and all of our personal issues, I kept him from you. And also burnt all the letters when he tried to talk to him. Elizabeth believes that she probably didn't convey this well to Tyler, and that he thinks she's lying. But she does give something that's rather important, and that's the copy of Station 11 that Miranda gave Arthur. Then eventually gave to Elizabeth to give to Tyler. That book, like we saw with Kirsten, becomes Tyler's obsession. And you can kind of see it gave him some sense of hope. But that hope gets destroyed because the plane that had the infected on it that were quarantined, there's one survivor from that, and Tyler sees them. And when he tries to bring them into the community that's being built at the Severn City Airport, Miles shoots him on sight. Well, not necessarily on sight, but within a few minutes of him being there and trying to approach anybody, even with him talking and all that, and they're like, nah, zombie, headshot, damn, down. And then what makes matters worse is, on top of Tyler seeing somebody get killed and getting that blood on him, then he has a gun pointed at him because it seems that he's infected and he's a threat. Elizabeth runs over to him, and that further complicates things. But luckily, Clark has enough influence over Miles, who has feelings for Clark, to have him get the gun down. And between the whole community that doesn't have any risk of infection, it's agreed that for 30 days, a month rather, Elizabeth and Tyler are quarantined. They're not quarantined like out on a plane where they're infected, where they get to quarantine in a jet that was in a hangar that is very comfortable. So they are not really suffering, especially because it seems that there's still food on the jet, or food being brought to them, and it's warm. So they basically get their own spot to relax in. And during this month period, all that Tyler does is read Station 11 over and over again. He absorbs all the loneliness, all the feelings of seclusion, and everything that Miranda wasn't able to really say out loud, so she conveyed through her graphic novel. And with that, and then combining it with some of the stuff that, once out of quarantine, that Tyler hears Clark say, and even maybe his mom a little bit, you can see that Tyler realizes that maybe he's not that much wanted, and it's not something that's in his head because of his mom and dad working so much, but that's how the adults actually feel. But for whatever reason, their words don't match their actions, and that leads to him ultimately deciding to fake his death. Which leads to the ultimate reveal that Tyler, who we met in Severn City Airport, is actually David. As in David, known as the prophet, the man who's a Pied Piper of the children, will have them strap mines to the chest and blow up people. When it comes to the highlights, the first thing has to be understanding the importance of the traveling symphony. As shown when it comes to us seeing the weeks, months, and years past day zero, people became very isolated and very scared of outsiders. So when it comes to the traveling symphony, while they aren't a trading caravan which brings goods from other places, they are proof that people exist out there, that it could be safe to travel again, and that when it comes to the outside world is maybe not as dangerous as people may think. For let's really look at the traveling symphony. You have somebody that doesn't have arms, you have a lot of women, and while yes, these women probably are armed like Kirsten is, only Kirsten is armed at all times. We don't see Alex handling a gun or even a bow and arrow. We don't see Sarah, aka the conductor, having a gun on her hip or nothing like that. The only person we see with a weapon at all times is Kirsten, and that's because of her life before she joined the symphony. Everybody else are a bit more carefree, maybe vulnerable, and if those people who look like that can move around, it does lead to the idea that society may not be where it was, but there is a path forward. The next highlight deals with the complicated relationships we see. The first one is Sarah and Gil, who clearly still have feelings for each other, and it's not just because of whatever romantic entanglements they had, but also because business-wise they made excellent partners. Sarah is the creative who's a little bit all over the place, and Gil gave her structure. And you can see without that, as much as she still is this creative person, now she kind of feels that without somebody to really ground her and organize things, she needs to stick to the basics, stick to the traditional way of doing Shakespeare rather than experimenting at all. And granted, the way Gil talks, she wasn't much for experimentation beforehand, but now she really doesn't have somebody pushing her to be better. Instead, they're just pushing her to deliver what she has always done. And I think with that, that's part of the reason why maybe she has such an issue doing all these symphonies, and it's because she doesn't feel challenged in a way that's actually exciting, but she just feels challenged in a way of trying to not be bored. And following that, you have Alex and Kirsten, and when it comes to those two, the way it seems, maybe around year 3 or 4, when Kirsten just joined the symphony, has this baby in her hand who knows whose baby. That's a good question. Who the hell are Alex's parents, or where did they find this baby at? That aside, clearly Kirsten took care of this child, at least played a major part in it. And when she spoke to Javon, she noted that she was an only child and was interested in being a sibling, or was interested in what it was like to have a sibling. So I think originally she kind of took on Alex as a little sister, but as seen by their relationship, no one else is really talking to Alex that much. She may hang out with Sarah, Wendy, a few others, but Kirsten is her main point of contact. Kirsten is the one who's teaching about the old world. She's probably shadowing Kirsten when it comes to acting, so Kirsten is her mother, older sister, teacher. She's pretty much everything to her. Yet, I think that what complicates the relationship is that as much as Kirsten is her everything, Alex is also aware that there's an outside world, and while most people don't really approach her trying to talk about what the outside world is, David doing so and using his charm that he inherited from his father Arthur, as well as all of those words in Station 11 that Miranda so masterfully put together, it's seducing. And you have to also factor in, there is no real ability to do teenage rebellion when it comes to year 20. Because what can you do? You can't sneak off to a club. You can't sneak off to get cigarettes, get drunk, or anything like that. The only way you can really rebel is leave the people that you were, who you grew up with, who you felt safety with. And for Alex, she's at that point where she has protection with the symphony and also with Kirsten, and she wants to know, what does danger actually mean? What does danger feel like? And David, while everyone says that he's not a good guy, and she even sees why, that sense of danger, that sense of curiosity, that sense of why is he so bad? Why does he act this way? Is just too. It's just too much for her not to explore. And from what it seems, she decides to leave the symphony, either for the moment to kind of get her thoughts straight, or else to find David in order to really explore what does this guy have over her. Following that, we have Tyler and his family when David was Tyler. And I think one of the things we have to recognize when it comes to Tyler's evolution into David, especially how Kirsten plays a role in it, is when David was Tyler, he didn't have anything really. Yes, he had Elizabeth, who was his mother. He also had a nanny, but he didn't necessarily have that love and attention or that tutelage that, someone like Alex had. So when it came to Tyler getting older, becoming David, one of the things I think we have to really focus on when it comes to him wanting to destroy the Traveling Symphony, and maybe also Kirsten, assuming he knows who Kirsten is, that is that Tyler has a negative experience and relationship when it comes to actors, when it comes to Shakespeare, and maybe even towards Kirsten. Because when you look at it, because his parents were actors, they never had time to spend with him and pretty much made him a secondary issue. Shakespeare is what his father's final play is, and now you have this traveling group trying to redo Shakespeare over and over again. And then with Kirsten, you have a combination of things. She's an actor, she is also a Shakespearean actor, and she's one of the last people that Arthur would interact with, and even made into a little bit of a protege. Which means that instead of Arthur spending time and focusing on his son, he was focusing on this girl who wasn't his daughter, who just came out of nowhere, and yet she's getting all this time and attention from a man who doesn't really give it to his own son. So you put that all together, and you can see that when it comes to David and Kirsten, whether he knows her or not, their connection, especially with them both knowing and with being affected by Station 11, has it where things have to be volatile. And if he wants to not necessarily get revenge or a leg up, but if he wants to really deal with all his issues, the only toxic way to do that is to eradicate everything that caused him. Which leads to the final highlight, which is David's origin story. I feel like with David, he's the only character right now who's been built up in a way that's kinda give or take linear. For with a whole episode 5 building him up, and then episode 4, and then a part of episode 2 showing us who he became, he's the only one who doesn't feel like we're missing major points in his plot. With Kirsten, we get her at age 8, year 1, year 2 or 3, and then we jumped 17 years to year 20. With David, yes, we get him at 8 years old, and then we get him at year 20, and it seems like a huge gap, but you can more easily kind of figure out and theorize what happened in that gap. For whether it's created his own little cult based off of his charm that he inherited from his father, using Station 11 as a bit of a Bible, you can understand how he built this following, how he started to turn children against their parents, grandparents, uncles, cousins, whatever, and even the communities. And even why he picks those kids specifically, because they're impressionable, no matter if they're 8 years old or Alex's age, and he can basically make him into a cult that will do his bidding, whether it's coming with him to get food, as Gil said he did before, or killing people when they reject him or else cause some kind of issues, with him just repeating lines from Station 11 as a means to justify his ends. The on the fence topic deals with just having a lack of interest in some of the characters who are portrayed as major characters, but they don't necessarily feel like it. In episode 5, that will be Elizabeth and Clark, because I feel that when it comes to Elizabeth and Clark, their lives revolve way too much around Arthur. And Elizabeth, especially, because when it comes to Elizabeth, she was Arthur's ex co star, Arthur's ex wife, Arthur's baby mama, and that's pretty much it. When it comes to Clark, there is like some type of attempt to make him more than Arthur's former best friend by noting he used to be a Goldman Sachs executive or consultant, something like that. There also is him using his bravado from being an actor to gather all the people together and have them under his leadership. But then I feel like Elizabeth kept chipping away at who he is as an individual to put him back under Arthur's umbrella and just make him into somebody who is jilted by Arthur and being used as why Tyler became David.